So hi all, and welcome to the third webinar in the Transforming Homes series. I'm Dr. Robert Grover. I'm a senior lecturer in architecture at the University of Bath, and I'm a co-investigator on the AHRC funded Transforming Homes project, of which these webinars are a part of. I'll give a little bit of background on the Transforming Homes project. The project involves residents, industry, practitioners, local authorities and community-led organisations, as well as researchers and universities, working together to co-design the transformation of our existing homes. Bio-based and non-extractive materials and technologies are being used to reduce energy demand, to generate renewable energy and to store energy while providing better places to live. Improving our existing housing stock is a national priority. When delivered well, the transformation of our homes can offer significant benefits, ranging from reduced carbon emissions, reduced energy bills to improved health and well-being, improved comfort, and a better quality of built environment. Realising these co-benefits will provide a better future for everyone. The Transforming Homes team is initially focusing its research on the 1.4 million 1920s to 1940s low-rise council-built housing in the UK. And the transformation has involved designing, modelling, testing, implementing and monitoring a variety of innovative solutions. So this webinar is going to focus specifically on the opportunities for scaling both housing transformation and the use of bio-based materials in the context of the UK. And we've got 5 excellent speakers who I'm going to briefly introduce, and then I'll hand over to each of them. So to begin with, Dr. Louise King is a research associate at the University of Bath and works on the Transforming Homes project. She's going to discuss the wider governance context in the UK and the challenges and opportunities for scaling, particularly around local contexts. Councillor Andrea Louise is the Deputy Leader of Swansea Council and will bring the context of a UK council and large social landlord. Professor Michael Lewis is also at the University of Bath and will highlight how the collective action nature of retrofit scaling is frequently missed and how this might be addressed through innovative delivery models. To be followed by Dr. Dashil Shah, who's Associate Professor in Material Science at the University of Cambridge and leads research at the Centre for Natural Material Innovation. He will talk about the work his team are doing around the innovation in natural material construction and its supply chain. And then finally, Dr. Caroline Weeks of the Building Research Establishment will talk about the specific policy and regulatory environment that shapes our use of natural fibre installations. Just to note, there's a Q&A function, so please do add questions as we go along. We'll be monitoring them. Some, if they're general questions, we'll respond to directly in the chat, but most of them, if they're directed at our speakers, we'll collect up towards the end and then we'll host a Q&A at the end based on those questions in the chat. But do feel free to just drop them in as we're talking and I'll collate them as we go. So now I'm going to hand over to Dr. Louise King, who is our first speaker.
So good afternoon, everyone. It is just afternoon, but yeah, hopefully everyone can hear me and see my slides okay. Do let us know if there's any issue with that. So as Rob's introduced, I'm going to talk a bit about some of the work we've been undertaking on transforming homes, thinking about scaling and thinking about some of the key policy and governance challenges and opportunities. Apologies. Here we are, it's all working. So transforming homes at scale is a key focus of the project. Improving the quality and efficiency of our homes isn't just central to achieving net zero targets, but it's also critical to tackling social inequalities. So issues such as fuel poverty, health and well-being, and delivering climate resilience. So I think I really Something really key that brought that into sharp focus in the last couple of weeks has been dealing with heat and extreme heat in some of our homes. So we need to make sure that this existing housing can provide not only warm spaces, but also cool spaces. So we have to adapt to the changing climate. So the project itself is about identifying opportunities for co-design solutions that support these kind of sustainable challenges for current and for future generations. And at the heart of the project is collaboration. So collaboration not only with the residents of these homes, but also with professionals and stakeholders, thinking about how we can develop, implement and scale transformations in a meaningful way. So I want to talk a little bit about the work we've been undertaking. So a key strand of transforming homes is engaging with and learning from practitioners, professionals, stakeholders. And we're doing this in a number of different ways. So we're working with the demonstrator home projects that Rob mentioned in Bristol and Swansea. And we're also working more broadly across governance and commercial organisations. And the aim really is to learn from practice, to empower those involved in delivery, and to support capacity building for transformation at scale. So the data we've collected and we are continuing to collect is through a number of methods. So firstly, undertaking interviews with stakeholders in the demonstrator projects. And this is stakeholders from local authorities, industry, community organisations and researchers in both Bristol and Swansea. And we'll be undertaking these interviews at the beginning, which is already undertaken, and also towards the end of the project. We are then conducting some workshops with stakeholders from across UK interwar estates, exploring some of those commonalities and contextual differences. So what is scalable and what is context specific, understanding this in a bit more depth. And then we'll be holding wider roundtable events where we disseminate our findings and test approaches to scaling, and that will be undertaken later in the project. So as I only have 10 minutes, I'm just going to focus on 3 key points really from the work we've undertaken so far. The first of which is thinking about fragmentation and coordination. So there are a number of opportunities and challenges presented by social housing for transformation at scale. So we have potential with the volume of stock and the relative consistency of housing types, although of course there have been adaptations over time to really transform housing. But a lot of the stakeholders that we've spoken to have discussed some of the real challenges around transforming this type of housing. And one key challenge is that of fragmentation. So fragmentation not only in terms of the sector itself, but also in terms of governance, delivery markets, which have been shaped by privatisation and right to buy. So we now have mixed tenure estates with limited and diverse local authority ownership, multiple landlords who are operating across the same neighbourhoods. And this really, our participants discussed about how this can make coordination more difficult. So at times there's no single authority making decisions. And it also reduces capacity to deliver consistently, to access funding, to achieve economies of scale. So this was a real challenge and a real need identified by our stakeholders to ensure that we had more coordinated approaches to enable scaling. So those are the challenges, but there are also a number of similar challenges mirrored in wider policy and governance landscapes. So a lot of the stakeholders we spoke to talked about the policy landscape and governance as a landscape which was constantly evolving, like spinning plates and moving targets. So retrofit itself, transformation being shaped by systems that are complex and overlapping, including legislation, guidance, funding, planning, procurement. Our stakeholders described funding environments which were often inflexible, with high administrative burdens and limited compatibility with their own internal resources, so making that really challenging to achieve. There's also a lack of clarity around net zero trajectories, which was identified, making it difficult to provide certainty for supply chains or invest in workforce developments. And governance itself, both centrally and locally, was described as being misaligned at times and siloed, with conflicting drivers across different areas of policy like housing, climate and social care. But there are also, despite these challenges, clear opportunities that were identified during our research for reframing and rethinking policy around scaling up. So there was a growing consensus across the research that we undertook and the stakeholders that we spoke to around the need for long-term government investment and direction to improve and build up the retrofit transformation sector, for clearer trajectories around climate action and a shift away from short-term market-led interventions towards viewing and framing housing transformation as a force for social change. So this was really important, and I think a lot of our stakeholders talked about the need for a consistent long-term cross-party approach to this and financing structures which support both whole house retrofit approaches and also more iterative steps undertaken. There's also a need for strategy to reflect the diversity in UK housing stock, from age, typology to ownership and occupancy. So the final point I wanted to come to is, of course, a very important and central one to this project, that of meaningful resident engagement. And this was identified as really critical to scaling up successful transformation. So establishing trusted relationships with residents is absolutely critical. Tenants have situated knowledge. They are experts in their own homes. They understand the day-to-day realities. They understand, for example, how damp affects their health. But engaging those residents in that design process, in that transformation process, could often be very challenging. It has the capacity to build consensus, to improve decision-making and reduce conflict. But it can be challenging for the stakeholders we spoke to due to limited resources and systems that are not necessarily designed to support meaningful engagement. So the underlying message was really that we need to, for scaling, try and build a culture of meaningful engagement. And what we're looking at in transforming homes is what co-design can bring to that culture. A transformation that's not only scalable, that's also just. So to bring those 3 points together, we really want to underline that the policy landscape is seen as and is experienced as very fragmented and dynamic, so very challenging to navigate. There's a need for funding which is more consistent, but also flexible to adapt to local priorities and to have governance structures that support this. Resident engagement was identified as critical to this, even though achieving meaningful engagement can often be structurally challenging. So government has to support acceleration and scaling with flexible tools. And ultimately, this is one of the key outcomes that we hope to achieve in Transforming Homes project, is understanding how co-design approaches can help address these challenges and support the transformation of housing at scale. Thank you.
Excellent. Many thanks, Louise. I'm now going to hand over to Andrea.
Okay, how's that? Does that come up for you?
Perfect. Thank you.
Lovely. Okay, great. Bore da pawb. Good afternoon, everybody. Sorry, Prynhawn da, I should say. Prynhawn da pawb. Good afternoon, everyone. Really pleased to be here today to tell you a bit about what we're doing in Swansea. And I thought it would be good to start with setting the scene in terms of who we are. So Swansea Council, we're one of the largest council stockholders in Wales. We've got 13,800 homes in Swansea, and we've already invested over £500 million in the first round of Welsh Housing Quality Standard to improve the quality and condition of our council homes. The next challenge that we're facing across Wales is Welsh Housing Quality Standard Round 2, or 2023 as it's also known. And this is a significant challenge. The estimated cost for Swansea alone is around £600 million. So I just wanted to do a bit of a potted history in terms of our house building history to date. So about 10 years ago, we started on the journey building homes for the first time in over a generation. So we haven't built council homes for a very long time. And so initially we wanted to start off with a passive house certified standard so that we could measure that using our in-house workforce building services, working closely with our housing teams. We quickly understood that the passive house standard had a gigantic carbon footprint. So we were procuring from Czech Republic, Belgium, Northern Ireland, and we were quite concerned about that, not just in terms of the carbon footprint, but we also were very keen to support local supply chains and local SMEs as well. And so we designed alongside Welsh School of Architecture not only the homes as power stations model, but also a Swansea standard as well, in terms of the thermal efficiency of the homes. So just to give you paint a picture of what that looks like, passive house is around, in terms of air tightness, 0.6. The building regulations at the time were around 10, and the Swansea standard was less than 5. So, we were really keen to make sure that the homes were as energy efficient as possible in terms of tackling fuel poverty for our tenants, but also in terms of our carbon footprint and reducing energy demand as well. So it was really very successful to date, the journey, and we've worked closely with Welsh School of Architecture for over 8 years now. And they've been monitoring our homes and our progress and our journey, which has been incredibly invaluable in terms of monitoring the data and the performance of our homes as well, so that we can test how well we're doing. So each site that we do delivers ongoing improvements. As I said, we're continually improving the Swansea standard across the piece. We've got 5 new build schemes in total, totaling 88 new homes built to these standards, and 65 of those homes are closely monitored by Welsh School of Architecture. So in terms of the homes as power stations model, that includes renewable energy in terms of solar on the roofs, battery storage, air source heat pumps, ground source heat pumps, and mechanical ventilation heat recovery units, MVHR units. And in addition to that, external wall insulation, internal wall insulation, cavity wall insulation, new windows and doors. And in Wales, we're currently looking at the Welsh Government Cllr pattern book for future schemes, which would help standardise the type of builds that we're doing in terms of materials, which would give a confidence to local supply chains and a certainty in terms of the regeneration and the pipeline for builds. And as you can see on the last point there, in terms of retrofit, we also had a fantastic scheme in Craigcefn Park, where we worked again closely with Welsh School of Architecture and used optimised retrofit programme funding, which made probably some of our least thermally efficient properties that we have in our stock and brought them up to one of the highest standards that we have. So we're really excited in Swansea to be working again with University of Bath and Welsh School of Architecture on the Transforming Homes opportunity. The homes that we've chosen, 4 homes in total for the pioneering pilot, are probably in one of our most challenging locations in terms of climate and weather, because they're the most exposed on one of our highest hills in Swansea. So it'll be a really, really good test. And these properties were constructed between 1919 and 1939. So really poor pre-war construction. So I'm sure that the residents there are really excited to welcome the proposed whole house retrofit using bio-based materials, which I know will be talked about by one of our other speakers later on. And incredibly important to us in terms of using those local supply chains. We are really pleased to work in close collaboration with our tenants, as Louise referenced. And, resident engagement is a huge focus for us as a council. We feel it's really important to have that continuing engagement. And I think using our in-house council building services will certainly help with this, because they've been working on our sites for so many years, and there is a definite trust that's been sort of developed over that time in terms of council tenants trusting the Swansea Council brand. And so, we must recognise that when we're doing a retrofit where we've got tenants in situ, it's not easy. It can be very challenging, it can be messy. And so it's really important that we have that ongoing engagement with our residents to make sure that they're coping with the level of works, and having that feedback and constant communication to make sure that they're happy as the retrofit progresses. And also really pleased to welcome a number of workshops being held throughout the scheme to ensure that they're continually fully informed and supported. So there are a number of benefits to co-designing the scheme with Welsh School of Architecture. My hope is that we will realise all these benefits from the findings in order to inform our next steps in our decarbonising journey, to roll this out to the remainder of our council stock, giving, as I said, security and certainty to the local supply chains that we use in order to roll this out at pace and scale. The scheme, as I said, will be used and delivered using our in-house retrofit team. We have an excellent track record in not only with our workforce in terms of building skills, knowledge and expertise, but we're very proud as well of our successful award-winning apprenticeship and traineeship programme. So we're really keen to develop these further skills in terms of retrofitting to a really high energy efficiency. And we're also currently undertaking training for PAS 2035, which would enable us as well to further access more ORP funding, which would be really critically important for us, given how expensive Welsh Housing Quality Standard 23 is going to be. So this slide clearly sets out all the benefits and the opportunity to explore the use of new materials, but also the lessons learned in carrying out the necessary research and development to help inform our future programme, which is really important to us. So there's no doubt, I don't think, that this could be potentially technically challenging. It will require really strong partnership working and collaboration between us as a council and Welsh School of Architecture, and also that continued engagement with the tenants. New products could take up valuable usable space in people's homes. So we need to engage closely with tenants so that they understand what they're undertaking. And, it's going to be obviously hugely beneficial to them as well in terms of the quality of home that they will have. For example, we are having problems with damp and mould, and these improvements will definitely help to address that. And also, as we know, energy bills are going up and up. And, some of our tenants really struggle in terms of the cost of living. So, this will be really important as well in terms of lowering energy bills for them. So we know from our experience how challenging it is to upgrade and refurbish tenants' homes while they're living in them. But as a council, I'm pleased to say we do bring that extensive experience in retrofitting while they're in situ. And we deal with our tenants very respectfully, and keep that continuing engagement with them. We've got a significant retrofit challenge ahead of us, but I'm really pleased that we're doing this scheme so that it can help us inform our ongoing efforts to reach EPC A rating across our stock. And I'm just really pleased that we're part of this and this ongoing partnership that we have with the Welsh School of Architecture and University of Bath. And that's it from me, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Andrea. Brilliant. So if people want to drop any questions in the chat, please do. We'll monitoring or in the Q&A, and we'll monitor them as we go. I'll hand over now to Professor Michael Lewis from the University of Bath.
Thank you, Rob. Can you all see my slides? Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
Thank you. Diolch, Andrea. I'm glad Andrea started to speak a little bit about some of the challenges there, because I think that's going to be the initial focus of my 10 minutes. That this is not an easy process. That we have been talking about this challenge for a large part of my adult life, and I'm not very young. The aspirations that we have for the level of retrofit we're seeking are constantly pushing back in time, and the number of houses we're successfully achieving this with remain at a relatively low level. So we have a significant challenge, and we have a challenge because we don't really know why we're retrofitting either. We have standards designed for one thing, we have intent around warm homes, and then Louise rightly mentioned we also have a heating crisis potentially. So we have questions of security and damp and comfort and community and a whole load of healthy living aspirations. And now the government would like us also to use this as part of an industrial strategy to grow our economy. Well, one of the things we know about trying to scale something is if we all think we're trying to do different things, it is unlikely we'll achieve those outcomes. So there's some profound challenges to retrofit that sit beyond the technical. And when I say technical here, I don't just mean the material design of the cladding. I don't just mean the heat pump design. I don't even really mean the design process, because some of the work that's gone on in this project with design and co-design has been extraordinary in showing a way forward to bring that design process to a larger scale of application. But there are profound challenges beyond the technical, and those are, I want to talk about those briefly. Coordination problems that our tech and our design just can't fix. In fact, in some senses, and this may be a paradox, our technology may make some of those coordination and technical design challenges more significant. And in a way, the technical challenges are pretty well documented. Our own project, Transform ER, Energy Sprong's work around UK and more widely. There's been a number of research projects that have shown that it is possible to scale some of the physical infrastructure of associated with retrofit if we can find a way of getting it deployed into the marketplace. And of course, that's why government is aspiring to have 70,000 more retrofit and heat pump installers by 2035 as part of the installation, as part of the industrial strategy. But there's a significant risk there, right? Well, the one risk is that further education funding is at 2010 levels, and we are now in 2025. So, and there's a whole load of sectors who want more trained apprentices, so quite where they're going to come from. But still, even if we have that supply chain of heat pumps and other things, that's the focus of government activity, we might end up with houses with heat pumps attached, where we all know that's particularly can cause its own consequences if you just fit one particular solution into what is a systemic problem. So let me try and articulate what I would see as three hooks for you to hold into your mind to think about the nature of solutions you're observing, and I'll use it to hopefully flag a more positive way forward at the end, that make sense of this, what Rob rightly described as a collective action problem. It is never about one particular fix. Otherwise, you're like that game where you have to whack a mole, right, with a hammer. Oh, I'm going to do heat pumps. Oh, I'm going to do insulation. Oh, I'm going to do... And that's just not going to work. So number one, we have interdependence, a deeply interdependent system. Neighboring properties may be neighboring, but being next to each other does not mean they're cooperating. And so consequently, even at the most micro level, the idea of interdependence without understanding the challenge of alignment, my point about national scale policies, I say, right? We know that heat and warmth and damp and all these other things are connected, but they do not necessarily align just because they're interconnected. And technical interoperability, so having a kit of parts and a set of standards and all the other stuff, that's great, but that will not give you social coordination. I want A, you want B. I want that heat level, you want C. And then underlying that, the economics, and in particular, the cost benefit asymmetry, very academic, but the point being that what I get and what you get will be different, are a huge role to play here. I've put 16.6 here, which some of you may, the nerds in the nerds in the virtual room may know. That's the percentage you pay on your electric versus gas bill to take your green energy levy. So there's still, although since 22 that has improved, it's still dysfunctionally skewed against electricity. So if we push a solution which uses electricity while we're also incentivizing gas, we create nationally and then locally a whole load of disincentives that are going to be hugely problematic. I haven't got enough time for this, but the industrial strategy is also solving some industrial energy use problems by putting increased levies onto domestic consumption. So that's not going to go away anytime soon. Andrea said that, right? Energy is expensive. So our motivations, our capacity, our ability to put up with disruption. So Andrea talked about doing stuff while people are still living there. Some people seem to live with that. They repair their house, renew their house all the time. Other people cannot cope with a tiny bit of dust. These are different people trying to come together in different ways. And then fundamentally, we don't really have the authority. And that's not just a question of national intervention. Louise rightly mentioned the point about having some clarity around this from government. Our political culture has traditionally not been one of long-term investment. It's been a series of short-term interventions. But when you move it towards the collective action problem, when you move it towards me and my neighbour have to agree, me and the local authority have to agree, we have to agree on a builder, even if you have national policy, you will not get collective action at the localized level. So no one can compel collective action. It has to be negotiated. So we need a way to think about that. I'll add in two other little twists because this makes it even more difficult, but these are things I think are resolvable at least. So these are problems currently, but they are opportunities to improve in the national landscape. We don't do certification and testing very well, even though we put enormous pressure on it to be important for a whole host of financial and economic and fire safety concerns. But when we talk to people who are working in this space, then it's confusing, time consuming, especially for innovative and novel entrants, especially for smaller firms. And my last quote here, I think is really important. We also have this really weird, which is a UK-wide problem, to be honest. If you try and do too much with your regulatory environment, you tend to penalize those people who take regulation really, really seriously, make them slow, expensive and unresponsive, and you give reward to those who don't care. So we picked up several suppliers who said, well, other people have quoted our fire safety certification in selling their product. So we end up with this worst of both worlds. The good children are punished and the bad children are rewarded. So it's a bit of a wild west if one had to describe the certification and testing environment for this work. And then specifically to transforming homes, we've set ourselves this super ambitious bio-based material ambition, local supply chains, renewable supply chains. But of course, coming back to the challenge of collective action and certification, that makes it even harder, because you now don't have a product with a track record, with stability, with consistency. You have profound challenges scaling. So I get product from Forest A and Forest B, and they're going to be different. And so I'm going to have to get different views of certification. Innovative products not sitting into existing PAS and other categories. So in some senses, the more that we're trying to have material impact in this retrofit world, the higher the hurdles we face. Okay, so let me finish because I've rambled on. There are some alternatives. There are some options. They are not easy. And if we genuinely seek to scale retrofits, then I think the answer is it cannot be done nationally. There are national things to be done, but we have to recognize that the unit of analysis is profoundly important. And finding that right, more localized unit of analysis is the critical one. We have the privilege in Transforming Homes to work with We Can Make, who are an attempt really to try and create this kind of thing, to create a localized, community-based set of actors who don't just lobby for or connect to different actors. What they do is they try to provide some of the service. And my point, I'm always inspired by Buurtzorg in the Netherlands. Buurtzorg means neighborhood in Dutch. So it's a community care nursing system. If you don't know it, worth taking your time to investigate, because it's something we should be doing in the UK for our care homes, our care services as well. But what Buurtzorg do and realize is you have to work with the community so you understand their needs and you don't just fix and run. So it's not about providing nursing and then going to the next region. You are the nursing environment for that region. And the point they're making is that you scaling trust, not the different templates of how you do the work, but you say, okay, this is a group of builders, retrofit coordinators, people who will be within this community and will stay within this community, smallish enough so that the retrofit is a journey, right? It's not a one-off fix. They don't fix and leave, they stay, they build that deep relationship. And over time, retrofit becomes a process rather than a series of one-off projects. Now, there are examples of this. I put some of them in the box there where we're beginning to see the first glimmers of the appropriate level of analysis. But of course, that's not quick. It's not simple. You can't mandate it from Whitehall, and we end up with the challenge always of, again, going to bang, looking for that magic solution, the retrofit bullet that will cure all our ills, when really we know the answer. It's a complex collective action problem, and to begin to solve that, we have to work in a community basis, collectively, and recognize that sometimes going a bit slower is what will allow you to go a little bit faster later on. I'll stop there.
Super. Thanks, Mike. So I'll now hand over to Darshil. So
thank you so much, Rob. Hi, everyone. On from Michael, I'll talk about some of the technical issues that we are trying to solve, but also we have also found similar aspects around the systemic issues, which sometimes hinder the technical opportunities to be implemented at large scale. We are at the Centre for Natural Material Innovation in the Department for Architecture at the University of Cambridge. We're quite a multidisciplinary team, so I thought I'd just share some of our background. Some of us are geologists and architects, designers, material scientists, and we try and collectively work towards some of the themes related to understanding how nature works, particularly, so using natural materials and structures as models, and bioinspiration and biomimetics to create new technologies and new material solutions or process solutions. We also work across lens scales, from the very nano or micro scale to build pavilions and structures to understand firstly how properties and materials processes scale at different orders of magnitude, but also through the process of making, understanding some of the other complex challenges as well, not just material related, but supply chain related. And we work across industry sectors, sometimes in the marine sector, in the automotive sector, in the textile sector as well. And we have a number of ongoing projects. And there is a lot to learn across these sectors, and there is not much cross-sector collaboration that happens and should happen, I suppose. And we try and merge these two applied and fundamental science research themes to create some of our own biomaterial processes. We primarily work on natural materials. Decarbonizing design of various products is a key focus, but increasingly we are focusing on circular design as well. So the CNMI was set up about 10 years ago or so for a Leverhulme Trust grant, and a number of departments, plant sciences, biochemistry, architecture, engineering, math and physics came together to understand wood from the molecular scale. And we work with botanists and plant scientists to understand how small changes in the cell wall architecture of wood can lead to different properties, but also then moving across the lens scales to understand how can we create mass timber structures or large-scale timber structures efficiently with architecture design firms and structural engineering firms. And those projects were quite helpful also in understanding different vocabularies, because this is quite an interdisciplinary topic, but also in reviving public imagination as to why we should be building with timber, perhaps, and what the opportunities are in decarbonizing, because there's a big public perception aspect to this that we need to try and explore and look at as well. Following this project, we had a number of research projects with the Centre for Digital Built Britain and ETSRC funding, following work from some built pavilions that we had, looking at prefabrication, off-site manufacturing. And here we were looking at the Gen Zero secondary schools building program that the DFE had, and we're looking at our own kit of parts for primary schools that we could implement using primarily English resources, or sorry, British resources, I should say. And in this case, we were considering MMC principles with a quite diverse design team with Waters Wilton architects, Smith and Wallwork engineers, for instance, and produced a kit of part solutions focusing on a fully demountable building system that was UK sourced, naturally ventilated, no wet trades on site as well, and it was built on micro screw piles on a car parking lot outside of the Fawcett School. So they needed a multi-purpose two-story building, which we tried to design for and got planning permission for. And in this case, the design system looked at reducing the embodied carbon of the structure quite significantly below the lead targets, as well as some of the other targets. And while it's great to work with on new buildings, one of the aspects we are looking at is also how can we think about resource efficiency. The UK is not strong in terms of bioresources generally anyways. We import a lot of our wood. England is the third biggest net importer of wood in the world. So we had a project with the Forestry Commission, which has just recently ended, looking at how to valorize British or English resources, English timber resources much better. Of softwoods and hardwoods, 84% of our hardwoods go for wood fuel, so very short-term applications, and in softwoods, 84% of our softwoods also go for short-term applications in fencing and pallet making, for instance. There's also a big contrast in timber framing in the UK itself as well, where England is about 9% for new houses, whereas in Scotland can reach up to 92%. So one of the things we wanted to explore was how can we divert the woods that are going towards fuel and short-term applications in pallet and fence making to more long-term applications for timber trusses. And this would require the use of ungraded timber, low-graded timber, and getting the industry more used to working with these sorts of materials. So we partnered with Timber Frame Management, for example, who are a Kings Lynn-based off-site manufacturer of timber trusses and timber frames for schools and homes. And we looked at the current timber trusses that were being produced, for instance, with the wood coming primarily from Sweden, of C27 grade, and these steel webs that are being used. We fabricated a number of our own truss structures, over 15 designs with English timbers, both softwoods and hardwoods, primarily beech, Corsican pine, and larch, of short span. So that was the other aspect. How can we use short span timbers? And 3 different types of connections as well, with these punch plates, with finger jointing and glues. But an aspect we wanted to also explore was both value adding, that would be important for the industry, and a key aspect for timber frame management was to ensure that fabrication time was still quite quick, and the wastage was still at 5%, which is what they were used to. So we fabricated a range of different trusses, tested them to industry standards, and we found that 11 of the 15 trusses that we had designed and fabricated met the industry benchmark standards, and we could use English resources to make these, even with ungraded or low-grade timbers below C16 or C16 grade. And the estimated implications, for example, if 80% of new homes and 50% of apartments were to be constructed with this, would be that we could have 72,500 homes or so annually fabricated with these English resources. And it would mean that rather than 2% of softwood production being used for the construction sector, that could itself mean 11% is being used for the softwood sector. There's also the value adding aspect where rather than for fence making, where it's £2.50 per pound per meter, the wood has a significantly better value. Other than ungraded timber, we have run lots of surveys with the supply chain in the UK, trying to understand the strategies for salvaging and repurposing timber elements from existing buildings. And a lot of the find we have found issues, as Michael was describing, in relation to the lack of existing supply chains, issues around certification and specification. The client buy-in was really, really critical for this, and the lack of pre-demolition audits, for example, as well, that is not a norm or standard. So we identified a number of barriers and opportunities, and are trying to explore these in a bit more detail as well. And that was leading some of this work. I'll end with an ongoing research project we're working on, Wood Circles, which is a Horizon Europe funded project where we are considering existing buildings as an urban forest from which we can harvest timber for production of CLT, glulam, mass timber effectively, but also insulation or chipboard, depending on its qualities. Certifying and standardizing the properties as well is a key aspect of it, alongside thinking about material passport and digital design with it, for example, as well. And a concept alongside the urban forest is urban sawmills, which would be regional sawmills where we could divert some of these resources, these extracted resources for being processed. As part of this, we are the biggest challenge Stora Enso, for example, suggests is that it's not actually a technical problem. It's a big supply chain problem. Is there even a business possibility around this? Is this even viable? And to support this, we are looking at wood stock models of how much wood is in existing buildings. And we are doing analysis at city level with our city partners, building level studies using archival resources and drawings of architectural plans, and component level analysis of built components as well, to try and get a good estimate of how much wood can we expect to harvest from specific buildings and what qualities they might have, what might be the geometries, thicknesses, etc., and expected grades of timbers as well. And alongside this, we are working currently on a concept or review of building deconstruction ecosystem, because again, there is a lack of this sort of coherent ecosystem that can support this as well. I think I'll stop over there, but happy to take some questions.
Excellent. Thank you, Dashiell. And finally, I'll hand over to Caroline from the BRE. I see there's a few questions going into the chat, into the Q&A, which is great. Please do keep dropping questions in there. And also, if you vote on them, I see some people using the thumbs up, other people are using the vote. Either method's fine, but it just gives me an idea at the end about which are the most popular questions if we're running a bit low on time. So I'll hand over now to Caroline.
Hi, Rob. Thanks very much. Hopefully people can see the slides. Great. So yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit briefly about our Retro Net Zero project, for which BRE are lead partner on this network initiative. It's trying to address some of the challenges that were touched on by Michael in terms of the difficulties that innovators of products and systems intended for retrofit have in trying to meet regulations that are facing them. So it's Retro Net Zero. It's a regulatory science and innovation network, which can be a bit of a mouthful. It's a project initiative that's funded by Innovate UK for this first year, which is a calendar year, which is going to run to December. The idea of the network is to explore the regulatory challenges to unlocking the adoption of innovation into domestic net zero retrofit. Maybe a slightly curious term, regulatory science. What does that actually mean? We sort of define that as the use of scientific methods and evidence to assess the safety, the quality, the efficiency of products that are linked to regulation, and also the tools and standards that help make regulatory decisions. So that's it's quite a niche, quite a specific focus, but the scope is potential innovation in products and materials, in building services, in efficient processes and techniques that are aimed at delivery into that domestic retrofit sector. So in that respect, the scope's quite broad, but it's looking for things where data, evidence, tools are needed to support innovators in that regulatory landscape and to help regulators better regulate potential new innovations. The partners on the network are just mentioned at the bottom there. We call it a network of networks because obviously each of these organizations have got their own extensive networks anyway. So we've got some great outreach and we're using that as the sort of basis for our approach. And the way we've set up for our first year of sort of demonstration of this network is we are conducting what we're calling challenge review cycles in sort of 4 monthly chunks. So each challenge that's identified, the idea is that it gets researched, it's discussed with stakeholders, and has, you know, a very stakeholder led, supported input, so that it can, you know, it can be usable and workable. That's reported and then sort of briefed to regulators for them to sort of take it on and hopefully run with. So it's 4-month cycles, and the idea of that is if there are things that are kind of resources that are required to support that regulatory space, the innovators in that space, they can be developed in that time. Or if we can develop an actual solution in that time, a technical solution, we will, which is great, which is a short, sharp hit that we could get that out. But what we also see is there could be a need for sort of feasibility studies for things that sound like they're plausible and that might have an in to aid in the regulatory landscape, but it needs a little bit more work. And in which case that piece of work would help kind of turn out a specification probably for a bigger piece of work, maybe another larger research project, which could then get picked up by a government department or a particular regulator to then maybe put that out to a wider consortium to specifically work on. But the idea basically is in these challenges to move the situation on for the particular identified challenge. So cycle 1 ran from January to April. We completed 3 challenges there. They are listed there. Those resources from those challenges are hosted on the website. The web link is given there at the bottom. Please do check it out and check out those resources. I'll briefly touch on the co-benefits work that we did in a moment. And we're in the middle of our second cycle of challenges, which will run to August. And again, mentioned there are the things we are currently looking at. One of them is linked to natural fibre insulation, which has been spoken about a lot in this session, so I'll briefly touch on that. And then we're also looking at things related to Appendix Q, difficulties for systems, and also consumer protection linked to heat pumps. So quickly jumping in to the co-benefits work. This was a feasibility study type challenge project that was led by the National Retrofit Hub, and it was to answer the question whether regulation could do more to incentivize and enable innovations that deliver benefits beyond just energy efficiency and net zero, because of course, you know, we all want healthier homes, we all want better internal environments, and the feeling was, whilst there's a lot of drive for net zero, some of these things are kind of being left behind when arguably they're the most important things. What we mean by co-benefits, it's the other side effects, if you like, whether they should be or not, that occur alongside the primary action. So things like health and well-being, fuel poverty, climate resilience, and so on. So the Hub carried out a very extensive piece of work through workshops and research, and working with their sector, can't name it now, excuse me, the working groups, that's the one, where they brainstormed all of the potential co-benefits that might be considered, and they came up with a sort of very extensive framework. But then they carried out workshops to kind of look through prioritizing these, and for the purposes of our project, our regulatory science project, the focus was on co-benefits that could be achievable through retrofit, for starters, that could be achieved by a product or a system rather than requiring kind of political or cultural shifts, because obviously that's outside our scope, that could be enabled through regulatory science potentially, and that weren't already incentivized by the market. We also opted not to go down the kind of life cycle impact, environmental impact route, because there's a separate regulatory science innovation network that was dealing with life cycle assessment. So this led to the shortlisting of a few targeted, probably no surprise, kind of key priorities, which were things like indoor air quality, risk of damp and mold, and then thermal comfort, which also actually covered overheating, which is shown there in a separate box. And then they explored the regulations that are linked to that and where there may be levers to kind of to allow innovative materials into that space. So I won't labour this due to time, but things like the Housing Health and Safety Rating System obviously underpins a lot of the regulations in this space linked to health and welfare. There are building regulations linked to ventilation and overheating, but these typically aren't triggered unless it's only in new homes or if there's work taking place. And then minimum energy efficiency standards is potentially a kind of useful lever, but currently has sort of limited application. And there's not really much reward currently for the sort of co-benefits structure. So it seemed the existing regulations weren't really enabling the co-benefits through retrofit, and products may support it. So the punchline of this feasibility study was the Hub produced a great feasibility report, which is available at the RetroNet Zero website. They came up with 5 potential recommendation follow-on projects, which we're now in the process of exploring with sort of various government departments, particularly linked to the Housing Health and Safety Rating System, for instance. And we're looking at prioritising the ones that would be most strongly linked to manufacturers being able to demonstrate their way in this space and to kind of prove their additionality. So I won't go for that. I won't go through this blow by blow, but do check out the report on the website. It's a great summary. And then to talk about one of the active initiatives, projects that we're looking at within the current cycle, we were looking at potential market challenges for natural fibre insulation, and we held workshops with the natural fibre insulation group at the ASPB to understand the challenges that were being faced in terms of scaling such insulation products in the UK. And we've heard some things about these already earlier in this session. Essentially, the feedback was that builders and specifiers aren't particularly familiar with the products, so they simply don't use them. So there's a real education and upskilling piece needed. Funded schemes have requirements to be lodged with Trustmark, and there are issues there in terms of installers, which is often linked to the number of potential installers who are familiar with these sorts of products, and then warranties linked to that. And then just the fact there are limited test standards that are available directly linked to some of these natural fibre products. And that can be a challenge when trying to achieve certification, because there's this bit of an unknown as to what needs to be tested and demonstrated. And even though there is a European assessment document for wood-based products, the feedback was that it's not particularly fit for purpose in some aspects. Now, taking all this away, some of these issues weren't necessarily challenges with a regulatory science angle, where we could sort of sink our teeth in and say that, what sort of evidence will potentially help to unlock that. But one of the things that we did take away and that we've agreed to do, and which is the focus of this current work that we're doing, is we're carrying out an analysis of the EU policy and regulatory environment that links to these materials, because the feedback is that on the continent there's much higher instances of use, much higher percentages of market penetration for natural fibre insulation materials than we're seeing in the UK. So we're looking at what the regulatory environment is that is sort of supporting that in these countries, and then with a view to kind of compare that to the UK space and seeing whether there's opportunities to then go to a particular regulator government department to see whether there is more opportunity there. Just to say that we're very aware that a big opportunity is the ongoing activities is related to warranties and insurance-backed guarantees, and we're currently watching those the kind of activities and discussions that are going on in that space to see if a regulator, a science angle, a data angle emerges that the network may be able to explore going forward. Won't labour on this due to time, but essentially our work to date, which is still in progress, has looked at found some key kind of evidence from France, Netherlands, and so on, where material use of this nature is more predominant, and it's essentially linked to requirements that have been put in place for sort of life cycle assessment and environmental product declarations and so on. So that's likely to be the basis of what comes out of our reporting on this particular challenge. So I think I'll stop there. Please do check out the website. Like I say, the resources linked to the co-benefits, as well as our innovation adoption pathways and our capacity map are are hosted on there. And if anyone's got any suggestions for regulatory science challenges linked to innovation in retrofit products, please do reach out via our website.
Great. Thank you, Caroline. Excellent. So thank you to all 5 speakers. Really diverse and insightful presentations, and I'm sure everyone agrees. And please do, as I said, put any questions in the chat. We've got a few in there already. What I'm going to do is I'm going to sort of work through them in rough order. I'm going to paraphrase them slightly because some of them are a little bit longer, so hopefully I get the gist of the question across. But if not, please drop something else in the Q&A and I can pick up on it again. Some of them are a bit more directed, so I'll start with a question that's a bit more specifically towards Andrea, asking, has there been any embodied carbon analysis on the Swansea standard homes? And it'd be really interesting to understand how these sit against other standards.
Yeah, so there has been quite a significant amount of analysis carried out by the Wales School of Architecture, and I think they're due to release their data imminently, but I won't steal their thunder on that because they've been working on it for a number of years now. But we are looking forward to analysing the actual pilot scheme that we're doing with the 4 homes, and that will be part of that very much so. But we've got a good understanding of our stock and the build types that we have. I'm not sure that we have an analysis as deep as the carbon in those homes, but we're looking to try and improve that as we go along as well on this journey.
Great, super. And then a few more related. Do you have plans in place to help retain those trained apprentices once projects have completed and the funds have finished?
Yeah, so the apprenticeship scheme, we absolutely want to retain our apprentices. That's why we've gone down the route of apprenticeship schemes. So like most councils, we struggle, and also probably social sector landlords as well, in terms of keeping trades. We've got an ageing skilled workforce, and we need to be able to pass on through mentorship and traineeship those skills to the younger generations coming through, because we know that there's certainty in terms of a pipeline of work there. And so we've got a huge amount of construction, not just us, but across Wales in terms of our social sector partners and Welsh Government's ambition to reach 20,000 affordable homes across Wales as well. So we absolutely want to retain them. We've generally got about an 85% retention rate with our apprenticeships. Sometimes we do lose them to the private sector because they do pay higher salaries, but we try and attract them, and particularly they're interested in the new build schemes, because retrofit is great as well, but having that extra string to your bow with the new site developments, apprenticeships are really proud of that as well.
Right. And then another question, I think, that's specifically about Swansea, but I think it might be quite interesting for Louise possibly as well to reflect on this in terms of transforming homes, and I could also pick up on it a little bit. Have you had a lot of pushback for things like air source heat pumps with residents, and how have you managed this?
We haven't had a great deal of pushback at all with the new technologies that we've put in on people's homes, only in the respect of the homes that we haven't yet put technology on. So, there are people who are really keen to move into the homes which have these technologies, because they know that there are significant benefits to having them. So part of our challenge as a council is trying to manage the residents who don't have these technologies, because they're really keen to have them as well, and really enthusiastic to get that done.
Yeah, great. Louise, I don't know if you want to pick up in.
Yeah, sure. I think it's really interesting question. I think more broadly, there's a couple of things probably we've identified across looking at some of the demonstrator projects. The sort of engagement with residents is, of course, very key to this, both in terms of technology acceptance, but also understanding any disruption and managing that. I think from the outset has been really important, and having that early communication to challenge perhaps any perceptions, any preconceptions or mistrust about anything around how you manage this. But I think also, really importantly, some of our participants talked about the challenges, the operational challenges once they were actually installed. So not only providing that support before installation and managing expectations around disruption, but also thinking about ongoing operational support, because there were instances that some of the participants I spoke to discussed where perhaps a heat pump had been installed and then largely not used or not used in its most efficient way by the residents due to perhaps some misunderstanding around operations, or perhaps some sort of tentative perceptions around the use as well. So I think that the two pieces really working with people prior to installation, managing the disruption potential expectations, and then also thinking about operational support as you move forward would be really important.
Great, super. Thanks, Louise. I'm gonna direct one at Darshil, because I know Darshil has to leave a little bit early as well. So
I can stay until 1:25 now.
Perfect. Well, okay. Well, it's coming to you anyway. So, alongside the availability of local suppliers, is procurement rules. Is that something you've looked at as well as part of your work, and perhaps in terms of some of those demonstrator projects?
Yeah, in part, we haven't looked at it in a lot of detail, but I agree that that is also an issue, particularly because, especially working with natural materials, you might have to work with them at earlier design stages to appreciate how they need to be manufactured, etc. as well. So I think easements and those are possibly a big win as well.
And then another one, sort of expanding on some of your projects. So there's quite a few questions embedded in here, but I'll paraphrase. Do you have any case studies of repurposing timber in existing buildings, and what is the environmental impact of this practice compared to harvesting new, particularly UK sourced timber? And are there resources around lists of businesses who are processing naturally sourced materials? So I'm sort of reading this on the fly. If we're scaling, or are most of the materials we're talking about more like experimental and university research specific scale at the moment? So I guess it's those kind of TRL levels and what materials are available at the moment as well. So sorry, quite a few things in there. So Darshil, I don't know if you can unpick that a little bit.
As SED has responded as well. The ASBP, the Alliance of Sustainable Building Products, has I think done a lot of work on this. The ACAN group on natural materials is also quite active in this area. I don't think there is a single list as such of suppliers, but I think that's a good start. Similarly, there are a couple of case studies of repurposing timber. I don't think there is much around reprocessing or remanufacturing of timber in the country, apart from work like Hollingdales and Butland Timber and some other companies. But I think that's at a lower scale. I think it's the issue around the supply chain, or lack of supply chain in the UK, that has been a big challenge in relation to that. There is also a substantial amount of work that has demonstrated that the working with UK source timber would reduce the embodied carbon of products. But I think as part of the Wood Circles project and otherwise, we are looking at LCA and social life cycle assessment frameworks to better understand both biogenic, dynamic carbon assessment of wood-based materials and the aspects around their transportation as well. The lifespan of the material is a big issue around that as well, and any pre or post processing that might be carried out too.
Great. Excellent, thank you. I've got one that's sort of directed towards Mike and Louise. So you both mentioned moving away from market-led initiatives. What do you think should replace them? And do you think that sectors like finance and supply chains have the capacity to adapt to see this shift?
Do you want to go first, Louise, or do you want me to talk?
You go, Michael, I think.
Okay. I mean, the markets work, and if you can clarify a market signal, it's very helpful. I started my talk by being clear that we're not having a clear market signal. We have a mixed set of objectives, and anyway, housing spits closer to what Ostrom et al. Would have called a commons, right? So it's not just a pure market good, and that we literally hear from people who are providing those through socialized means as well as private market means. So we're already in a mixed market model. And I think there are models where we go through that. I mean, Bertzog, in a sense, is a sort of regional cooperative model. It has a very light national infrastructure to provide some of the active stuff, but essentially the funding and the flow of money goes to those regional cooperatives. And it tends to front load because it's more expensive and engaging with, like you might imagine, retrofit. It's an uploaded, front-loaded cost. But then if you set up the price correctly in Bertzog, it's that you get people who are healthier for longer, so they don't incur the costs of senior care and hospital time. So I think there's something similar you could imagine with longer-term community ownership and some kind of bond type issuance, which financial institutions I think would be interested in because it's, it would be relatively low but steady income. And we already have a marketized economy with our housing associations and stuff as well. I wonder as well whether the regulated asset model, which we traditionally associate with very large scale assets, could be interesting here. It becomes retrofit, it's almost like an infrastructure service. And I like that because, as Louise just said, right, it's not a one-off. We're treating them as projects and they're not. They're interventions into an ongoing flow. And so maybe there's a way of thinking about having accountability through all the standards we talked about, but again, upfront investment with a kind of recovery. Lots of risks with that. You only have to look at PFI and other type attempts to try and do that to see what can happen. And then, even more radically, the more I think about this, our traditional model for a lot of employers in about 150 years ago was that employers would lead on their provision of their housing to their employees. And I do wonder whether universities and councils and the NHS and others might, rather than thinking about providing this to others, start to think about, one of the ways because we can borrow money, we can have access to the capital, is we can start to act as anchor institutions to retrofit into our employees, not just the people we serve. That's probably too wild for most vice chancellors and chief executives of trusts, but I rather like the idea of the spirit of Port Sunlight, but in a retrofit world.
Very good. I like that a lot. Louise.
I suppose the way I would come at it is thinking a bit more about reframing, really, and thinking about moving away from market-led approaches and kind of thinking about value for money and shifting maybe towards retrofit transformation as this force for social change. So this opportunity really to leverage those co-benefits that Caroline talked about much more broadly. And I think as well, what's been really interesting in this project is working with organisations like Swansea and We Can Make, where not only are we thinking about communities and neighbourhoods, but we're thinking about the delivery of these works as well. So thinking about communities delivering that. And also perhaps just thinking about the change being more incremental within communities and neighbourhoods, sort of incremental iterative change where we're putting it in the hands of those communities. And I think transforming homes is interesting if you think about the sort of heritage of these interwar estates, where they were originally designed to be neighbourhoods and communities. So I think part of this is kind of localising and contextualising it and thinking back to, well, this was designed to be essentially a garden city with great infrastructure and a community that was enabled through the design of the estate itself. So thinking back to it as a focus on maybe community and neighbourhoods and a social force for change rather than the value sort of market-led approach, which of course has come about through the fragmented nature of the sector. So perhaps we need to look at it more in that way, reframe it, how we look at transformation and shift our ideas that way.
Great. And I don't know, Caroline, if you feel there's a sort of policy angle related to this that that might be relevant in terms of creating that policy environment that can support these different initiatives for enabling change.
It is a difficult one. I mean, particularly in the work that we focused on that I'm talking about today, it's not full of kind of quick wins, and it's there are challenges that are a bit more of a sort of slow burn. So yeah, not too much to add to what's been said just now on that particular one.
Right. So I've got a question from Joe to everyone, and so we can go around in turn. What barrier to scaling up the transformation of homes could be overcome most easily or quickest? So I don't know who wants to take that first.
I don't mind going on that because it kind of follows on from what I was sort of just getting at. And like I say, the things that we've kind of mostly come across does show that, you know, there aren't that many quick wins. I do wonder, I don't know what the other speakers would think, whether maybe easier wins of sort of the awareness raising about products and trying to overcome those barriers of that apprehension of using new products might be a bit of a quicker win. Yes, that will have a knock on kind of training needs for installers and to become competent in those products, but it could potentially support the able to pay market quicker, because what we tend to see is there's a lot of focus in retrofit on funded schemes, and they kind of have their own ways of tangling things in knots, with good intentions like PAS 2035 retrofit standard and so on. And whilst good intentioned, it can disadvantage, you know, useful products that then schemes such as, I gather, you know, the sort of Swansea scheme and that of them finding difficulty implementing in a retrofit scheme because perhaps it doesn't have the certifications and the warranties and so on. So yeah, I mean, it's what we see in that space in terms of the sort of certification side of things is any leniency that you might think you could offer to a manufacturer to help them through those sorts of processes is then counteracted with a consumer protection angle that says, but hang on a minute, if by offering that leniency you've, I don't know, you've allowed somebody to use a product which turns out that there's an issue, then what happens? Then it's the consumers that suffer. So we're seeing it's really challenging. We're obviously looking at these challenges that are being addressed and trying to find a way through. And we're often seeing this conflict between trying to support manufacturers to put good, new, innovative products that support the retrofit scaling against, but what about consumer protection? Any leniency you offer there, how are you going to make sure that's addressed? Anyway, long-winded thing, but it's kind of linked to the structures that we've created for ourselves with the funded schemes. And I wonder if actually there are some easier routes in able to pay, which might be overcome by just sort of better awareness of products and what's needed. And I think as a nation and able to pay market, we're all got our head in the sands a bit and we're thinking it's someone else's problem, it's not for us. So don't know if anyone else thinks differently, but there you go.
Yeah, Mike.
Tuppence-Smith.
Great, thank you.
No, I build on that. And the second you aggregate it to a national problem, you get into that kind of thicket, right? Because it's just this systems theory tell you that the regulator becomes too complicated. So my first thing is make sure it's a regional and sub-regional issue. That every time you feel you want to make it anything more than light touch nationally, it's wrong. Industrial strategy encouraging exactly the same thing. Health strategy exactly the same thing. The second you try and pull it to be a national, it gives you a quick, easy, and wrong solution that probably makes things worse in the long run. So I think that pushback to accepting some kind of regionality and sub-community is critical, I think. And then, you know, this is a bit silly maybe, but I was watching another one of the, I nearly swore then, programs on TV where we retrofitted a house by pouring incredible amounts of concrete and putting glass in it and making it 50 times bigger than it needed to be, so they all live in one giant kitchen. And I think, wouldn't it be nice if occasionally we encourage some kind of that narrative around real livable houses and how great they can look when they're redone, made relivable as well. So there is scope, I think, for the public narrative to be framed more positively. And that's probably about saying this is part of the housing mess in the UK, not a sub part of it. It's part of that broader question. So when Darcy says, you know, will we take material from a demolition? That's so it's part of a life cycle. It's blending together. So yeah, if it's a quick solution, it's almost certainly wrong. Sorry.
Andrea.
Yeah, thank you. Not to be too simplistic about it, but if we had an informed direction of travel where we know what materials are needed, and as Caroline referenced, you know, that would be for the owner occupiers, the private sector as well, then we would hope that we'd help our money go further in terms of economies of scale, because everybody's asking for the same materials, the same thing in the same space. And we've got so many competing priorities as councils tackling homelessness and lots of other things coming our way. We need to make our penny go further. So, you know, in terms of all being in the same space, asking for the same materials and giving certainty to the local supply chains is really critical, I think.
I think, yeah, just building on that, I think agreed with a clear indicator, possibly to the part Z or similar, where you regulate embodied carbon, because I think that's a part that we've still not gone to do that, and it's much needed. But I agree that it also then, you still need a regional approach also to not have these clogs of not having enough material in the system, for instance. And that has happened in other places where, for example, in France, they have mandated 50% of public buildings below a certain height need to have biobased materials, and there's a significant shortage of wood, for example, to be used because the forestry sector has not been consulted as part of this as well. So I think it's important. It is quite complicated. It's no easy win. But I also wonder what we mean by bioregional, and I think that's an important question to have. I think particularly skills are really important, what we need to focus on, especially in the retrofitting area. But also because of the significant capital investment required in manufacturing hubs, it depends what aspects can we have as manufacturing hubs of. We cannot do everything in every region, for example, maybe, but it's something to explore further.
I think that's a sort of great question, isn't it? What scale means for different areas of the, you know, of the picture. And I mean, Louise has already mentioned kind of hyperlocal approaches, and some of these aspects take, you know, almost a street scale kind of approach to ideas about regional regulation, and then ideas about supply chains and, you know, bioregional areas. So I think there's an idea, you know, when we talk about scale, what that means and what that means for different areas of supply chains and delivery mechanisms as well. Louise.
Sorry, I can't seem to virtually raise my hand, so I am in person raising my hand. Yeah, I think they're all really interesting points. I suppose just to add to that, I think a key thing is really recognising how fragmented the sector is in terms of ownership and tenure, and what some of those challenges are, and having policy and funding that kind of actively encourages and facilitates collaboration across that. Now, obviously, that is a lot easier said than done. What we don't want to do is introduce systems or funding requirements that actually add further complexity. So it has to be a viable option. But if we can manage to do that, I think then we can leverage, as Andrea was saying, those kind of economies of scale, and also think about developing workforces. But I think there has to be in it sort of more flexibility to encourage that regional and local collaboration when it comes to looking for funding, working together, decision making, so that perhaps you can have that hyper local approach or at a neighbourhood scale. But you've got to recognise and have systems that support how fragmented the sector is.
Great. I think I'm gonna finish with one final question. And Darshil and Mike, you've both talked about examples from Europe of you know, kind of alternative delivery mechanisms or different things that are happening, you know, obviously in terms of particularly in terms of France, or Bert's talking in the Netherlands. I wondered if there were any other really great examples internationally that we could draw from in terms of improving the quality of our housing and how to do that at scale, and whether you're aware of any really great initiatives that are happening perhaps anywhere in the world that really are managing to do this really well at perhaps a kind of a national scale.
Well, I mean, I mentioned a couple in my presentation, as you say, and Energy Strong, obviously, whilst making decent inroads in the United Kingdom, are doing it on the back of a pretty decent track record in the Netherlands. It's always the Netherlands, right? They're also tall and sensible, but there is a different political culture there, and it's also a smaller country, and it also is strongly regionalized. And so some of the German experience is very similar, where they have a much stronger regional political culture, stronger funding. Interestingly, in my closer reading of some of the most successful social housing retrofit, it's where there's also been, to my point of connectivity, maybe combined power and heat networks in play as well. So there's already the basis for some of the connectivity and collective bargaining that would otherwise be, well, I've got gas, you've got electric, which fragments terribly our UK system. So, I mean, I guess the point I would make in response broadly is it really is time for the UK to look seriously at those other examples, though. I think we've become very insular in recent years. You know, I won't say any more on that, but I think we need to look out. We have some profound challenges, and people don't do it perfectly, but they do it better. And so I think, and it can help us, I think, take a lead from, you know, Sheffield doesn't want to copy Leeds and Manchester doesn't want to copy Glasgow, but maybe we can all learn something from Berlin.
Yeah, yeah, and following on from Michael, I think it also depends. It's quite, it can be on a problem basis, for example, as well, or yeah, component basis. For example, one of the things we were looking at is adoption of low carbon or especially innovation in the construction sector, and how that is limited by PIL and insurance. And we've compared the UK and Denmark, for example, and how the systems are completely different, and where in Denmark it seems to be supportive of trying to innovate. That can be quite challenging in many ways in the UK, we have found. So I think it could be on the basis of certain parameters, because the conditions are not exactly the same everywhere anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. Brilliant. Well, thank you all for your time, and thank you for everyone that joined us as well. Veronica's dropped a couple of links in the Q&A as well. So if you're more interested about the Transforming Homes project and you don't know much about it, there's a link there to the website. We also have a newsletter which you can sign up to as well. But thank you very much for coming along today, and do reach out to, I'm sure, any of us if you've got any follow-up questions. There's contact details on the Transforming Homes website as well, and we can pass on your questions where they're needed as well. Thank you for coming along. This is the end of the current series, but hopefully we'll be able to do a few more when the project's gone a little bit further. So thank you very much to everyone, and goodbye.